the way that you describe them trying to get Odysseus to participate in the games with them, he goes over and just throws the heaviest rock he can find. It reminds me a lot of when in the Hunger Games, when they're all in like the training room, and then Katniss's brilliant idea is to make Peeta go throw the heaviest thing he can.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, whoa, that was so impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're making fun of you.
They're making fun of you. Go throw something heavy. And they're like, whoa, that's crazy. Didn't know he could do that.
Welcome to Winnow, a couple's close reading of the Iliad and the Odyssey. I'm Owen Gemmer.
I'm Isabella Gemmer. We are married, and we love to talk about books together.
In this podcast, we are working our way book by book through the entirety of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. This particular episode will cover the Odyssey, Book 8.
Yep. The longest one maybe so far?
Maybe so far, yeah.
Yeah.
But still shorter than most of the Iliad books.
Yeah. But a lot has happened, which means it's going to be a difficult 60-second recap.
Yes. It is my turn to give the 1-minute recap, and Bella will ask the opening question.
Yes. Good thing, too, because I do not want to give the recap. 3, 2, 1, go.
It's morning, and Alcinous gathers everybody and says, hey, let's get this guy a ship. He sends off the sailors to go get the ship ready, and then everybody gathers for a feast. They're feasting, they're eating. The bard is there, and he's super famous, and so he begins singing songs of Troy, and Odysseus starts crying a little bit. Alcinous notices this and is like, hey, let's give this guy a break. Let's go outside and play some games. So they all go outside. They're doing races and stuff. Odysseus is just sitting on the side, and they eventually go over and invite him to play, and he's like, no, I'm a little bit old. And then one of the other Phaeacians basically insults him, saying like, oh, this guy's probably not athletic. He's just some merchant. And Odysseus gets, so he gets up, he throws a giant rock further than anybody else and is like, I'm so strong. And everybody else is embarrassed. Like, oh, this guy is strong. We better not challenge him to more fights. Let's just dance instead because we're really good at dancing. So they dance, and Demodocus, the bard, sings about Mars and Venus and all these other people. And then they go back to the feast, and then they begin singing about Odysseus. But he is very sad, and so he cries.
1. Good job.
Thanks. I've been caffeinating myself.
Oh, yeah.
Energy, let's go.
Yeah, and I don't know why, but the time change is like, hit me. And I don't know what time it is. And I have not gotten much sleep.
So what is your opening question?
Okay, so there are two ways that I thought about going with this. One of the ways that I hope we'll maybe get to it roundabout in a bit. I do want to talk about the weird song that the bard sings about Ares and Aphrodite and Hephaestus and that sort of love triangle and what that might symbolize. But I don't think that's a great way to start the conversation because it's so in the weeds. So I would like to talk about a Homeric simile that is at the end of this book, and I shall read it. Odysseus himself asks that the bard sing the song of the wooden horse and how Odysseus dragged it inside and to the citadel, filled up with men to sack the town.
Yeah, so he asks for the story.
He asks for his own story, and the bard sings it, and he gets sad. Odysseus was melting into tears. His cheeks were wet with weeping, as a woman weeps as she falls to wrap her arms around her husband, fallen fighting for his home and children. She is watching as he gasps and dies. She shrieks a clear, high wail, collapsing upon his corpse. The men are right behind. They hit her shoulders with their spears and lead her to slavery, hard labor, and a life of pain. Her face is marked with her despair. In that same desperate way, Odysseus was crying. No one noticed that his eyes were wet with tears except Alcinous, who sat right next to him and heard his sobs. My question is pretty simple, which is just why compare Odysseus to a woman weeping over her dead husband?
Yeah. No, it is such an interesting contrast and juxtaposition of imagery because my gut reaction is just to point out the deep irony where the bard has just been singing about the sack of Troy, where Odysseus was one of the men who was sort of like killing women's husbands and sort of taking them off to pain and slavery and things like this. And so Odysseus was the kind of like bad guy of that simile. And now he's being compared to the opposite, to the woman who's weeping and sort of trying to not be taken away. Yeah, I don't know exactly what to do with it, except to point out that like it does feel like it's the opposite of how it should be. Because
Yeah. So in the context of men dying at Troy and their widowed wives being taken away to slavery, Odysseus was the cause and perpetrator. He was the widow maker.
yes.
And now he is being likened to that very same widow.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it shows that how much Odysseus has changed since that moment? Because again, like in the narrative, that moment now was like 8 or 9 years ago when they sacked Troy. And so Odysseus has gone through a lot more pain and trouble, which we'll begin to hear about very shortly since then. And so I wonder if this is hinting to us that now Odysseus has been the widow maker, but now he is more like the widow and he has kind of like changed perspectives on war.
Something that stands out to me is this idea that Odysseus is sort of the leftovers of war. He is one of the only people left standing, right? With all of his men. He doesn't have his men with him. So obviously all of them have died somehow. Even though he was victorious in the war, he is still a leftover of the war in the same way that a widow being taken into slavery is a leftover, right? Is the, what's the word? Wreckage, I guess. The widow being like one of the last things left alive from the altercation, kind of.
Yeah.
So it sort of points out this thing of whether you win or lose, whether you were the Odysseus or the widow who lost her husband and is now in slavery. I do think being a widow and in slavery is harder, but that's just my personal bias. But whether you were the winner of the war or the loser of the war, you both are still alive after it, and therefore neither of you are winners. Does that make sense?
Because you're alive, but you have lost kind of everything.
Yeah.
For the widow,
the
it's a more
winning.
literal thing, and for the soldier, it's a more kind of metaphorical, like you've sort of given up so much in order to become so destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Because I think, when I read this simile, I can't help but think about the beginning of the Aeneid, which wasn't written by Homer, but is very clearly sort of in the style of Homer, but it is from the perspective of Aeneas, who is one of the Trojans. And I think it's book 2. It's one of the very first books where we get the story of the sacking of Troy from the Trojans' perspective. And it is so beautifully but tragically and brutally written. Like I remember reading it, just like you feel the pain of the Trojans sort of like watching their home crumble and all of the Greeks come in. And like when you read that part of the Aeneid, you really feel this metaphor of the widows sort of like wailing and weeping and trying to sort of get away. And how can you not in that moment feel cruel towards the attackers, being Odysseus and the rest of the Greeks? Yeah.
I always, whenever I read a simile like this, I always think about the part in Hamlet, right, when the players show up and they perform a little snippet of, I'm not sure what like historical drama it is. Tragical, historical, comical. But someone recites a whole speech about Hecuba weeping over her dead husband, Priam. I always think about that, and I always think about Hamlet's classic, like, who is, he to Hecuba and Hecuba to he, and those kinds of things. And adding that layer of, like, players playing these characters of the slain and the widow, and so.
Yeah.
And Odysseus, like, it's not fair to, like, transpose all those things together, but in my head, they're all very much one and the same.
I think at least though Shakespeare wants us to, like when we read Hamlet.
When we
read the later ones, right? When we read Homer, it's not fair to transport Shakespeare back in, but when we read Shakespeare, we can transport Homer forward.
Yeah. And like that bit in Hamlet like wouldn't exist without these things before it and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see that, those kinds of, that image of a widow crying over her husband, like, is this very, it's like a staple of like drama and literature.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because we saw it often in the Iliad as well. It was less with Hecuba. There was a little bit with Hecuba, and it was more with Andromache, who is Hector's wife.
Yeah.
Because Andromache, both back in book 6, when she was trying to get Hector to stay back, and then at the end, after Hector had died, we saw her again being incredibly passionate about, you know, her fear about what would happen to her if Hector would die. And then the reality of that happening after Hector dies, and that just the pathos being just so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so I think, embedded within all of this simile, there's this idea of sort of like pity and remorse and regret and sort of intensity, which leads us to Greek time.
It's Greek time.
Within this one simile, which is only about like 10 lines, there is a Greek root word that comes up in a couple of different forms, both in the positive and negative form. I'm going to read from Lattimore's translation because he's good, at least in this particular instance, of translating it with kind of the same words and see if you can notice the similarities. So, as a woman weeps lying over the body of her dear husband, who fell fighting for her city and people as he tried to beat off the pitiless day from the city and children, she sees him dying and gasping for breath, and winding her body about him, she cries high and shrill, while men behind her, hitting her with their spear butts on the back and the shoulders, force her up and lead her away into slavery, to have hard work and sorrow, and her cheeks were racked with pitiful weeping. Such were the pitiful tears of Odysseus, shed from under his brows, but they went unnoticed by all the others. And then it goes on. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the root word that you might hear in 3 different cases is pity in English. I think when I listened to you do Wilson, she did it as despair and desperation, which I thought was interesting. But it also comes up at the beginning of the simile as pitiless. So there's both pitiless and pitiful, which in English are opposite of one another, and in the Greek are also opposite of one another. The word that is used at the beginning of this simile, as he tried to beat off the pitiless day from city and children, is neleis. All of these words I'm going to absolutely butcher the pronunciation of because Greek diphthongs and sometimes triphthongs, where you have 2 vowels or even 3 vowels in a row, just don't sound anything like any diphthongs, or we don't have any triphthongs, I think, in English. And so, forgive me. So this is a compound word. Ne is a negation, and then eleos. And in the last half of the simile, again, we see different forms of this eleos. So the noun form eleos, the verb form is eleeo, and the adjective form, which it appears here, is eleinos. And if you have spent any amount of time in any church that, you know, is sort of like a high church or does any sort of liturgy, you might be familiar with the phrase Kyrie eleison. This is the same thing. So Kyrie eleison in liturgical context is Lord have mercy. And so this eleos is like mercy, pity, these sorts of things. And then obviously the negation of it is merciless or pitiless. And so there we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that strikes me about this, the pitiless stuff. So it's pitiless day, the day that the city falls, and then but the tears that the woman weeps are pitiful, and the tears that Odysseus weeps are pitiful. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's just interesting to like have all that right next to each other. The city falling and the consequential actions, right? Like the city falling, the husband dying, meaning that the woman's now a widow and the widow's going to go into slavery. Like that's all the pitiless day, kind of. And it's kind of like no one's taking pity on this, right? Because like none of the aggressors in the situation would be taking pity on this.
Right.
Also emphasized by the fact that the men behind her hitting her with their spear butts on the back and the shoulders force her up and lead her away into slavery, right? Like it's a very,
what's happening is happening and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it's pitiless. There's nothing, no one is having mercy on the situation, right? But from our perspective, we feel bad for the widow, and her weeping is pitiful. Like, we have mercy on her weeping.
Yeah, so it's a shift in perspective, right? Like, from the perspective of the soldiers who are attacking, they are pitiless. But from the perspective of us as onlookers, we are pitiful. Like, we see the weeping as pitiful. And so it depends on like who you are. If you are the woman, obviously, like, it's tragic. If you're the soldier, you're pitiless. And then if you're the audience, you're pitiful.
Yeah. And then if you are the person, Alcinous, who is perceiving Odysseus's tears,
Right.
you feel those are pitiful tears as well.
Right.
So Alcinous is feeling a sort of mercy towards Odysseus.
Yeah.
So, and that's the part that I find the most interesting. We should talk about next, probably.
Yeah, because, right, like, we all have to remember this simile, right? There's all these layers of both, like, what's happening in this simile, what's happening to Odysseus, but then also how Odysseus is being perceived, not just by us, the readers, but by the rest of the audience at the feast. Because in both cases where Odysseus cries during the storytelling, both at the beginning of book 8 and here at the end, it's very clear in the narration that Alcinous, who's sitting right next to him, is the only one who knows. It's even like Odysseus like puts his cloak up and is like trying to like hide his tears, and but Alcinous notices, and he's the one who's able to like put a pause on the storytelling in order to sort of care for Odysseus.
Odysseus. He covered up his face. He was ashamed to let them see him cry. Each time the singer paused, Odysseus wiped tears, drew down the cloak, and poured a splash of wine out of his goblet for the gods. But each time the Phaeacian nobles urged the bard to sing again, they loved his songs. So he would start again. Odysseus would moan and hide his head beneath his cloak. Only Alcinous could see his tears, since he was sitting right next to him. Or I just put the right in there myself. That's not in there. Since he was sitting next to him and heard his sobbing. The big question with Odysseus and his sobbing, because he gets the simile, right? The simile compared to the widow with the pitiful tears, it does feel very real. But that doesn't mean, I don't want to suggest that he is fake crying.
I think you can suggest it for sure.
I don't know if I want to suggest that, but I just want to suggest that from my read on the situation, my take on the situation is that Odysseus is like, okay, I'm going to cry. I might as well use it to my advantage. And so he doesn't want everybody to see him crying. He only wants Alcinous to notice his crying. Very much like I want someone to ask me why I'm crying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I'm much happier to read it more kind of cynically, not cynically as like a negative towards Odysseus, but more in terms of like, this is a ruse of his, that he is setting all of this up so that he can have the sort of grand reveal of who he is, like from the very beginning. Like, all of this is super intentional on his part. And again, I don't say that to like denigrate him. It's kind of impressive and it's fun because he's clearly like putting on a show and trying to like inadvertently hype himself up. Like, why else would he ask for the bard to sing of the story of Odysseus unless he wanted that to be on people's mind when he then goes, oh yeah, I'm Odysseus, right? Because like, if from the very beginning he was just like, oh yeah, I'm Odysseus, people might not know the story, they might not have heard it for a while, and they might be like, okay, I don't know what that means. But now he is sure that like when he name drops himself, everybody will be like, oh, you're that guy? Whoa.
He still has not said his name in this book.
That's true.
He has, at the very end of this book, Alcinous asks him his name.
Yeah, and it ends with, tell us who you are.
It ends with that question mark in the air.
But he does, again, Odysseus drops more hints, because in the middle, when they're at the games, when he's talking about how good he is at all of these physical feats. He's like, oh yeah, when I was at Troy, I was the best archer besides Philoctetes.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, wait, you were at Troy?
Yeah.
And nobody calls him on it.
Yeah.
But he just like subtly drops like, oh yeah, when I was fighting at Troy. So again, I think Odysseus is very clearly like dropping enough hints so that people are beginning to be suspicious and want to ask who he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At Troy, when the Achaeans shot their bows, the only one superior to me was Philoctetes.
I like it. Again, like I think it's peak Odysseus being sort of crafty and performative in a way that in this moment I don't think is skeezy. Like he's not like intentionally lying or it's not like harming anybody to do this.
Yeah, there's no lies in this book that we know of. You know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, there is the lie that he tells to the people who come challenge him. He's like, no, I'm old and tired and I can't really compete. Like, no, he can. He's choosing not to.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I imagine he is a little tired, actually.
Yeah, but he gets up and he throws the biggest rock the furthest anybody's ever seen.
Exactly, but he's trying to space out his mic drops.
Yes.
Right, like he's trying to, but he gets goaded into dropping.
Yeah.
Into throwing the big discus as far as anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to say though, I'm still on the side that his tears are genuine, but he uses his tears for specific ends.
Right. And he intentionally set up a scenario where he knew he would cry genuine tears.
Yeah. The first time he cries at the beginning of the book is not, it's just the poet and the bard just sings random. It's not very specific. It's just like the general, it could be the Iliad. You know, it's just the general song of the Troy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he didn't ask for that. So right, that part was not like part of a scheme, but I think as soon as Odysseus like felt the tears coming, he was already beginning to think like, yeah, I can figure out how to use this to my advantage.
Yeah. If you're gonna cry, you might as well.
Yeah. So with the interruption of the first crying for games, and then through all the games, we obviously, I think, also have to think back to book 23 of the Iliad, where we had the funeral games. And I think these games are happening in two very different contexts, right? In the Iliad, they were sort of games as part of a funeral that is mourning, but is then sort of like celebrating the life of Patroclus and these kinds of things. But here, these games are sort of purely just a part of a feast. Like it's kind of just for fun. There's not as much emphasis on like the prizes that everybody's winning. Whereas in the Iliad, it was very much like Achilles was like, here's first prize, second prize, third prize, go at it. I'm going to give out all these gifts. But here in Phaeacia, it just seems like they're doing it because it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It doesn't go on as long as the funeral games because I think that these games are very much in here to show us that the Phaeacians are not. They like the one guy bashes Odysseus for not being an athlete, but so yeah, the games don't go on for very long. Then one guy challenges Odysseus. He gets up, throws the biggest rock the farthest, and then Alcinous kind of interrupts everything after that happens. He's like, well, we aren't really known for our throwing of the heavy things. We are much more like lovers of the lyre and dancing. And then it's like it transitions from being a show of physical prowess, but a different kind, which is this, they do this elaborate dance where they throw balls up in the air and then they catch them and all this stuff.
It's like rhythmic gymnastics in the Olympics. That's still an Olympic sport. Yeah,
it's very different type of physical show. Odysseus does say he's impressed with it. And then Alcinous is pleased that he's impressed with it. And Alcinous is like, bring this man gifts.
Right. But I think the whole time there is this undercurrent, both from Odysseus and also I think from the narrator to us, that like these people are only pretending to be good at war. Like they're boxing and they're wrestling and things like that. But like they have never actually known war. Yeah. And so all of this is just games to them. There is no actual sort of like oomph behind these contests because it is simply, you know, it is all fun and games for them
because
their life is kind of idyllic and they're withdrawn and they're isolated. And so they just they have fun running around and wrestling and
Yeah, I think Odysseus is watching it and he might be kind of impressed, but I think a big part of him is saying, this is silly.
Right.
That's what he's thinking.
Right.
And he's like, well, I might as well compliment them.
Yeah, and I think, again, it sets up this contrast between what we saw in the Iliad, where we had constant sort of feats of physical prowess, both in the war itself and in the games, that all were for some purpose. Obviously, a lot of the Iliad is about Achilles questioning the purpose of the war and is this all really worth it? But it is undeniable that throughout the entire epic, all of the feats of athletic prowess are for some end, either for the ends of war, killing other people, or for the prizes that Achilles is offering up. And remember, we had talked about in Book 23, the word sort of athlete comes from athlos, which is he who strives for a prize or the contest that has a prize. The prize is sort of inherent in the athletic endeavor. And without that here in Phaeacia, I think Odysseus is rightfully what's the point of all this?
Mm-hmm. There's no prizes for winning one of the individual contests, but there is a prize for being the best guest ever.
Yes.
And so that's why Odysseus is always he's always quick to compliment things, even if he maybe doesn't think that they're that great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wanted to point out that this book opens with reminding us one of Odysseus's epithets is the city sacker.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe all these guys, all these Phaeacians are not competing for prizes, but Odysseus is always competing for a prize.
Yeah, and I even wonder, this is just purely speculative, but I wonder how much Odysseus is thinking, if I came here with a full army, we could wipe these people out so fast.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a little bit of that in him of these weaklings who just run around for fun, they don't know anything. And
yeah, I do think that the Phaeacians, their real strength is in how they are good seamen. They are really good at
sailors.
Wait, there's a word for that. It's called being a sailor. They're really good sailors, and they can get from point A to point B really fast. And the island might exist in such a place, such a location on the ocean, that it is hard for a not as experienced sailor to reach their island.
Yeah.
So that could be that's probably one of the reasons why, not they're so isolated, but also gives them that advantage and keeps them from being attacked.
Yeah.
So then it's interesting to also factor in the other thing that the bard sings.
Right. While the big dance is happening.
Yes.
When they're outside, just sort of in the fields.
Yeah. There's kind of the bard kind of sings 3 times.
Yeah.
It's the first thing, which is the basic overarching story of the Trojan War. And then there is what I want to talk about, this Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus love triangle. And then there is the story of the Trojan horse that Odysseus requests be told.
Okay, yeah. So since I skipped over this pretty quickly in my summary, let me just give a brief overview of this myth. So I'm going to mix up the Roman and Greek names because in Pope that I'm reading and Butler that I'm narrating for the audiobook, it's the Roman names, but now it's the Greek. So Hephaestus is married to Aphrodite. Hephaestus has a gimpy leg and is a little bit embarrassed about this. And Aphrodite can get with whoever she wants. And she and Ares are having a fling, and Apollo, who is the sun, sees this and tells Hephaestus, and he's very upset. Mm-hmm. So he, basically being a craftsman, weaves a bunch of invisible chains and sets a booby trap in his bed, and then is bye guys, I'm going on a trip. And then as soon as he's gone, Ares and Hephaestus begin
Ares and Aphrodite.
Ares and Aphrodite begin, having their affair, and they get trapped in the contraption.
Yeah, they get sort of locked into place by these invisible chains.
Yeah. So then Hephaestus, he comes back and is like,
He's
gotcha.
like, haha. He calls all the other gods. He's like, come, let's laugh at them.
Yeah.
And they all laugh. Ha ha. Basically, there is a whole conversation about Hephaestus wanting to be paid back the dowry he paid Zeus to marry Aphrodite. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of kind of back and forth about who should be paying who what, who owes who what. They agree that Ares should actually be the one to pay the literal price for adultery. Mm-hmm. And Poseidon says, let Ares go, and if he tries to weasel out of this debt he owes, then Poseidon will pay it for him.
Yeah.
And yeah, then I think that, and then they are free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the big question, and I will say, like, this takes up a pretty decent chunk of the book. Like, it's not just like a summary. It's a pretty long story. Why would Demodocus the Bard choose to sing this song in this moment, sort of in fiction? And then from our perspective, like, why would Homer put this story here in the context of Book 8?
I don't really know. I don't have a good answer to the first question. Why would the Bard himself choose to sing this?
Can I then try and answer just quickly? Because I think the second question is more interesting anyway.
I do want to mention just briefly that he's the classic, he's literally blind, but has a penchant for storytelling. Mm-hmm. Like, it's that classic thing, which Homer himself, if he was a real person, was rumored to be the blind bard. Yeah. So this is kind of potentially a self-insert character, right? Breaking the fourth wall, maybe, something like that.
Yeah. And so I think, like, the tale is generally kind of like a little bit of a slapstick thing. And again, I don't know enough about how these stories sort of, like, you know, were set to music or things, but I could imagine this story being a very kind of light and sort of upbeat thing that would be good for dancing. Mm-hmm. Because again, I think the core lesson from the story is about the frivolity of the gods, that, like, it just kind of all means nothing to them except Hephaestus. Like, he's trying to take it seriously, and, like, nobody else seems to care or to think that this is as big of a deal as he does. And so it's just this kind of, like, silly, like, oh, the gods are all sleeping with each other. Woohoo, let's have fun. Mm-hmm. So it feels like good dancing music.
Mm. Once Ares and Aphrodite are, like, locked in the invisible chains, there's kind of this series of, like, people just kind of telling jokes about them. Yeah. In the story, like, of their situation. Yeah. So even though it is, like, about heavy topics, like adultery, it is still played off as, like, maybe a more of a comedy. Mm-hmm. But why thematically is this included in the whole story at this moment of the Odyssey? I do think it has something to do with how the Phaeacians are not a warlike people, right? So they wouldn't have any, like, that idea that they don't really have an affinity for Ares. They would find themselves to identify more with Hephaestus.
Yeah, but there is this contrast because if they are sailors, they should be closest to Poseidon, and Poseidon sort of sides with Ares, right? So in the story, the sea and war are sort of tied closely together, but in their lives, they are very closely tied to the sea and very far away from war. So there's at least that contrast and juxtaposition.
Yeah. So the general sweeps of this story, we could say, is that, like, someone pulls a trick and then someone has to pay a debt. Mm-hmm. Like, that's kind of the general arc. Sort of what's happening, you could say, is Odysseus is pulling a trick on the Phaeacians and making them pay.
Yeah. My other theory, too, goes back to what we talked about early in the Odyssey, where people are constantly, both the narrator and Nestor and Menelaus are bringing up Agamemnon's story about how he was killed because of Clytemnestra, his wife's infidelity and sort of revenge on him. And this sort of goes back to that same question of, like, when you're away, you always have to be wary that, like, you know, your significant other is going to be cheating on you or something. Like, I don't know exactly how it fits with that theme, but it definitely is sort of in that same vein as the sort of, oh, did you guys hear about Agamemnon being killed by his wife when he was away? And in this case, the sort of the husband who was away sort of wins. He's successful in sort of preventing the infidelity, in contrast with Agamemnon, who failed and died as a result. So yeah, again, I don't know exactly how they fit together, but I do know that they seem to be dealing with similar themes that obviously we're supposed to be thinking about Odysseus, like what's going to happen with Penelope back home and all these suitors who are also trying to sleep with her.
Yeah, I guess you could say, yeah, that overarching theme of nobody wants to come home and find themselves to be the cuckold, right? Like nobody wants to be the one who's fooled in that situation. And so,
wait, I might have it.
Okay, go for it.
Do you want to finish? Sorry.
Just that, yeah, like you're saying, Odysseus doesn't want to go home and find out that he has been cuckolded, right? That in that situation, but also that the Phaeacians themselves in this moment don't think they're getting cuckolded, but perhaps Odysseus is trying to swindle them.
Yeah. I guess so. The thing that clicked in my head, I wonder if this is also, though, maybe a more direct foreshadowing of what does happen when Odysseus gets home, because even though Hephaestus sort of laid the trap in advance, when Odysseus does get home and sees the suitors trying to be with Penelope, he does trap them, like literally, like he figures out a way to get them all in one room and like all of the doors locked, and so he can just like massacre them. Spoilers, but I think that's pretty obvious. And so there is a sense in which he and Hephaestus are actually very similar here, of like, even though Hephaestus was actually cuckolded and Odysseus never was because Penelope remains faithful, unlike Aphrodite, there is this sense of like Odysseus is able to recognize the threat to his marriage and devise a very cunning trap in order to sort of catch the sort of offending males.
Yeah. So this could be from maybe Odysseus's perspective. He's sitting there, he's crying. He's like, "Don't look at me, but you, just one person, you can look at me." And then he hears this other story. He's like, "Oh, that's not a bad idea. I'm gonna save that for later."
Yeah.
And then he goes back to crying.
Right.
Like that's kind of what he's thinking.
Yeah.
For the people listening, this is an example of what it looks like for people to in real time kind of play. I think it's a good thing to show, like sometimes we don't always come to the text like having we know this is probably a metaphor for something, right? But you can sit down and you can toss ideas back and forth to try to figure out an answer to the question. I'm sure maybe you listening have your own take on it, and I would be happy to read that in the comments.
And also, I'm sure that the thing we just came up with has been said by hundreds of people before. Yeah, like, probably. I'm sure that we didn't just come up with like an original reading, but to me, that's okay. Like that's what I like about reading really old texts, is like there actually is something refreshing about coming up with an understanding of something that has also been sort of hit on by smart people for literally centuries in this case. And like, I feel like, I'm a part of this. Like, I understand this too, even if it's not original. I think the sort of modern and American sort of push for originality is crazy overrated, and it's fine to simply participate in the conversation that people have been participating in for thousands of years, even if you're not going to add something radically new to it. So thanks for joining us. Is that a decent place to wrap up? Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. Let me just give it a quick look just to make sure.
I will say, since we were talking about Demodocus the Bard as a kind of self-insert of Homer, back when we, in I think one of the earlier books, talked about the Travis Scott character who's going to be in Christopher Nolan's Odyssey, I think this character is much more clearly like a main character in the narrative than whoever was telling stories at Menelaus's house. So I wonder if either the previews were misleading and this character is who Travis Scott is playing, or if Christopher Nolan is kind of like is going to condense some of these like storylines into one. Yeah, it just makes me curious.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like this is it's a condensing all the Bard moments into one kind of thing. Yeah, would be probably efficient storytelling. But again, like what order is Christopher Nolan going to tell the story in?
Yeah.
is a mystery to me.
Yeah. Because again, like in book 9, I promise we've been sort of hinting at this. Odysseus will name drop himself in book 9. Definitely. He's just been directly asked, like, what's your name? He's not going to keep lying. He's now going to start telling the story. And then we get sort of the flashbacks back from the beginning. And so this is a very good point for any storyteller to change things around, because we're kind of getting to a split where for the next little chunk, we're kind of in the past, but you could easily start from there and work in different places. So,
yeah, we shall see. I do want to mention one little note before we wrap up, which is that Alcinous, at the very end of this book, he mentions that there is kind of a vague, I guess, prophecy that he heard his father, Nausithous, talk about. But I once heard Nausithous, my father, say that Poseidon hates us for the help we give to take our guests across the sea. That sets them up in opposition to Poseidon.
You're right. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they're so good at sailing, and Poseidon, as the god of the sea, needs a certain amount of sailors to die to prove his power, that like the sea is more powerful. And that makes sense.
They're able to use their knowledge of the winds to navigate themselves over the sea and these kinds of things. Poseidon hates us for the help we give to take our guests across the sea, and that one day a ship of ours would suffer shipwreck on its return. A mighty mountain would block our town from sight. So father said, perhaps the god will bring these things to pass, or not, as is his will. But come now, tell me, da-da-da-da. He's talking to Odysseus. So I just want to mention that it's like a little, like, I once heard this prophecy that a mighty mountain would block our town from sight. That will come back. That's all I'm gonna say. It's easy to gloss over, but this is relevant.
Dun dun dun. Well, not to say it's going to be relevant in book 9, but book 9 is up next, and I have an audiobook of Samuel Butler's translation ready if you would like to listen, or you can read, or you can just tune in, because we will summarize from there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're about a third of the way through the Odyssey, and so if you haven't liked and subscribed and want to join us for the rest of the journey, please do so. We would appreciate having you with us.
Mm-hmm. And until next time,
happy reading.